Welcome to Mission Oriented, a VeteranCrowd podcast that showcases veteran talent from both the private and public sectors. Their impact is everywhere. We are here to uncover it. Here's your host, Bob Louthan.
My guest today is H.R. McMaster, Lieutenant General, U.S. Army, retired. He's a West Point grad, class of 1984, an armored cav guy, former U.S. National Security Advisor, and a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, and on the program Goodfellows. General, welcome to the program. Thanks for stepping in here this morning.
Hey, Bob, it's great to be with you.
I'd like to do a little icebreaker with you. I do with some of my guests and I ask them 3 questions off the cuff. So here's the first one. You have to choose a different branch of the military and a different MOS. Get to do it all over again, General. What is it?
Oh, man, I don't know. Could I say Marine Corps? Could I take the Marine Corps? I don't know. Maybe. I think it would be the closest to land combat in the Army. And a different branch, like within the Army, is that the question?
Well, different MOS,
different MOS. Okay, so I actually did pick a different one because I was commissioned in aviation, and they found astigmatism in my eye on my way to flight school when I was at Fort Knox. And they said, "Okay, hey, now you're an armor officer," and thank goodness the Army denied my request to then go to Fort Benning and to start infantry basic there because my second choice was infantry, and so I became an armor officer as really kind of my third choice, and I wouldn't have changed a thing. So I was lucky to become an armored cavalry officer.
Okay. Second question. What do you think the most significant life lesson is that you took away from your time in the service?
Well, I think the most important lesson is how much you can accomplish as a team more than any individual can accomplish. And if you have a team of people who are working together, based on a common vision, a common mission, and a team that's bound together by mutual trust and common purpose and actually affection to a certain extent, that you can accomplish anything. So I think that's the most important lesson I learned from the very beginning.
All right, third and final question. What's a little known trivial fact or skill that you have that most people don't know about?
Oh man, I guess I'm a washed up rugby player. So I played. Maybe people don't know is that I think I have the distinction of maybe being the slowest wing in Army rugby history. But Bob, I was deceptively slow, and but also my latest skill I picked up is paddleboarding. I'm a paddleboarding aficionado, enthusiast, I guess I should say.
Okay, well, that's what I call the lightning round on the VeteranCrowd Network. General McMaster, thanks for participating. Let's jump into the discussion here. I want to cover a couple of things in a few minutes this morning. The first question on my mind is let's talk about Ukraine, and I really want to talk about Putin. Dictators don't retire. He's in a tenuous situation right now. What do you think's going on there, and particularly the saber rattling that's been going on recently with the nuclear threat?
Well, Bob, he's utterly failing in Ukraine, and he's failing because all the assumptions he made about the war were wrong, right? The assumption one was, hey, Ukraine's not even a thing. Their will's going to collapse. This guy Zelensky, he's a comedian, he's an actor, he's a ballroom dancer. I can take him, Putin thought. The second thing that was wrong was he thought that that the Ukrainian military would collapse. But the Ukrainian military has been training. They've been focused, obviously, on defending their country, especially since the invasion of 2014. It's important to note that February 24th was a re-invasion of Ukraine. The third assumption he made is that the Russian army had the prowess, right, to subsume Ukraine very quickly, when of course it's a Potemkin army. We saw that the Russian army can't fight together effectively. They can't conduct combined arms operations. They don't have logistic systems in place. They haven't trained. They don't have the confidence. They can't apply joint capabilities in an integrated manner. And then finally, he thought there'd be a lot of disunity in the West, and that's what he was banking on. That's what he's still banking on today. And so, Bob, as you alluded to, what has he got left? He has energy coercion, which he's been trying. Right, he blew up Nord Stream 2. As a way to say, hey, I can go after your infrastructure as well. And he's got the ability to rattle his nuclear saber but that's all he's got left. And I think, also you pointed out in your question, there's no off ramp for Putin. Putin, an off ramp is just another opportunity to look for another on ramp. So in terms of what we should do about it, is we should give Ukraine everything we can to help them defend themselves, right? Longer range fires, long range surveillance capabilities like the MQ-9 Reaper, and then what we are doing now, which is rushing more of the air defense capabilities to them. And they also need protected mobility, right? They need to be able to restore the mobility to that battlefield and take back territory. So we ought to be pulling out all the stops now, Bob. And instead of trying to find an off ramp for Putin, like you hear rumors of the last few days, we ought to be taping his foot to the pedal and help him accelerate into the brick wall that he's headed for. Because it's only until he acknowledges that he's been defeated, I think they're going to have a restoration of peace in Europe.
With the winter coming up, how's the European resolve? I mean, this sort of an alliance that's aligned. I mean, isn't that going to be tested here in the coming months?
It is going to be tested. It is going to be tested. I think that the European will hold together. I think that surprisingly, Germany's been pretty strong. Although Olaf Scholz's visit to China, he didn't look like he demonstrated a lot of resolve there. So, but I hope that he comes through. Interestingly, the Green Party in Germany, has a lot of resolve in terms of outrage about the humanitarian catastrophe in Ukraine, and then also a willingness to confront Putin much more than the SPD party of Olaf Scholz, who's the chancellor in this stoplight coalition government. I think France has not been as strong as it could be, but I think what Europe has going for it is the conscience of Europe right now, which is Eastern Europe and the Nordic countries. I think that they understand that unless Putin is defeated in Ukraine, they're probably next. It's not going to be the end of conflict in Europe if he is able to declare victory in some way in Ukraine.
We certainly don't want to encourage him by giving him anything to be encouraged about. One final question about Ukraine. I mean, are we going to be able to kind of keep the genie in the bottle? That part of the world, sometimes conflicts like this have a tendency to spread.
Yeah, well, it's already spreading, right? What you've seen, I think, now is obviously the refugee crisis has spread the conflict into parts of Europe. You have the energy crisis. We haven't talked about Farmageddon, or the effect that the war has had on global food supplies and prices. But then also, you have now the Iranians involved in the war. The Iranians are selling, drones, and probably they're selling their missiles, their drone missile complex to Russia. You have North Korea selling ammunition to Russia, and you have China aiding and abetting Russia with its wolf warrior diplomacy, as well as several of its companies, which are really providing critical components so that Russia can maintain its war-making machine. So it already is a significant, I think, conflict with global implications, certainly, but also it's spreading beyond the borders of Russia. The Black Sea's been shut off by Russia, and I think the conflict will likely expand first in the Black Sea region as the Ukrainians really continue these, I think, disruptive attacks on the Crimean Peninsula, which is Ukrainian. It was illegally annexed by Russia in 2014. And maybe extend some of these attacks on the Russian fleet, like you saw with some of these very inventive, improvised drones, sea-based drones that attacked the new Russian flagship after they sunk the Moskva a few months ago.
We're all going to be watching all of this very closely. Now we'll shift gears and we'll talk China a little bit. Xi Jinping escorts his predecessor out of the Communist Party. Things a clear consolidation, a message to everybody of who is in control. Can we talk a little bit about what I think is an enormous risk? The upcoming Chinese, Communist Party.
Absolutely, and what we forget about until you see an image like that is until you see Hu Jintao walked out and everybody just staring blankly ahead. You forget that the Chinese Communist Party is communist. We forget that that it is ideology that drives and constrains the Chinese Communist Party leadership, as well as emotion, and especially the emotion of fear of losing the party's exclusive grip on power. And this is why it's important to recognize that that China is trying to pursue its aims at our expense. and to promote its authoritarian mercantilist model, to create servile relationships across the Indo-Pacific and more broadly globally through economic coercion, and to rewrite the rules. They want to rewrite the rules of international discourse, trade and economic discourse, security discourse, what human rights even means, in its own favor. And so this is an extremely important competition. We need to wake up to it. I think we're beginning to, but there's much more that we need to do to ensure that we being the free world, maintain our competitive advantages. And also, really take some actions now, because we're so far behind on allowing ourselves to become overly dependent on China for critical supply chains. And so, I hope what we've learned from Russia's aggression in Ukraine is we ought to prepare now to respond to Chinese aggression in three main ways. Defense, we need to strengthen our defense. I mean, I think we are way underinvested in defense, Bob. I mean, we are well below what I think we ought to be spending, about 4% of our GDP on defense. We need to develop countermeasures to the countermeasures China's developed to take apart what they saw as our advantages. And we need larger forward position forces to deter conflict. I mean, that's actually much less expensive to deter conflict than to have to be able to react to it. We have to learn the lesson from Russia in terms of energy security and the need to integrate energy security with national security and with efforts to reduce carbon emissions. What Germany did to try to leap from hydrocarbons to renewables was a leap off a cliff and into Vladimir Putin's arms. Let's not do the same thing. I mean, how the heck did it make any sense to cancel a Canadian pipeline and greenlight a Russian one? I mean, how does it make sense to, instead of the US producing, to make up for some of the global shortfalls in natural gas and oil supply, to go begging to the Venezuelans and the Iranians to do that? I mean, we really need a sensible energy security that's tied to national security. And then finally, we have to shore up our supply chains. We're over-reliant on China's supply chains. And Xi Jinping has said, in this pursuit of a dual circulation economy, what he wants is to foster our dependence on him while he's insulating negative financial or economic consequences.
The Chinese are very strategic thinkers, a very formidable adversary. What is the risk of an out and out invasion of Taiwan, however?
I think it's high, and it's getting higher. And the reason, I think, is that Xi Jinping realizes that he might be running out of time, that he's running out of time because of he's not making his economic growth targets. The idiocy of his own policies, the tech crackdown is a reason for that, as well as the zero COVID, where these massive lockdowns of cities, when they weld and bolt people into their own. That's creating and having a negative effect on economic growth. And I think that as his anxiety increases, he's going to feel more and more pressure to make good on his promise to make China whole again, in his view, and to subsume Taiwan. So I think we're in a race to deter China. There's still, I think, a strong possibility he would wait until after 2024 because of the Taiwanese election is in 2024. But we ought to be doing now for Taiwan what we wish we had done for Ukraine prior to the reinvasion in February of this year. I mean, we ought to help the Taiwanese make that island indigestible and to pose the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army with unacceptable costs, where they try to annex Taiwan by force.
Okay, third little track here. You and I both served. My time in the service much shorter than yours, sir. But at this point in time, how do we get young people interested in a life of service coming into the military? Our premise at VeteranCrowd is that a little bit of time in the service prepares you well for life, but we've got some recruiting problems. We've got some systemic problems getting enough qualified candidates for today's all-volunteer force. Let's talk about that.
Well, Bob, I think your organization is so important because you're in a great position to explain to young people the rewards of service. I think so many young people don't get how much fun it is, right? How challenging it is, but it's how rewarding it is. And that's because I think popular culture cheapens and coarsens what we would call the warrior ethos. And I think that, the popular culture, Hollywood, and, they tend to portray veterans as traumatized, fragile human beings. They don't realize that, that for the vast majority of veterans, that the challenging experiences that we encounter actually strengthen us and make veterans even more valuable citizens, even more valuable to the companies and the enterprises that they join after military service. And I think what young people don't really fully understand are the tremendous rewards associated with being part of a mission bigger than yourself and being part of a team in which the man or woman next to you is willing to give everything, including their own lives for you. Good military units, as you know, take on the qualities of a family, and if we can explain that, I think, to our young people, they'd be going to the recruiting office in droves, because what I sense in our young people, and I have the great gift of being able to interact with incredibly talented, motivated young people in universities, is that there's an untapped desire to serve. So I think if we can help explain the rewards of military service, that we'll have many, many more young people going to that recruiting office and finding ways to serve. And as you mentioned, you don't have to do it for your whole life, right? I mean, right. I was going to get after 5 years in my retirement party. My wife Katie had this great little roast speech she did, and in which she thanked me for the bonus 29 years.
It's amazing how many people go into the service thinking they're going to make it a career and don't, and how many go into the service thinking, "No, I'll just do this for 4 or 5 years and then go do something else," and end up being in 30 like yourself. General McMaster, thank you so much. We'll be welcoming you to Richmond, Virginia later this week to the Richmond Forum. Thank you so much for participating. It's great to meet you, and look forward to spending more time with you in the future.
Bob, thanks. Hey, I love Richmond. I can't wait to get back. Great talking with you.
Thank you. You've been listening to the Mission Oriented podcast on the Veteran Crowd Network. Our guest has been General H.R. McMaster. Again, thank you, sir, so much for your service to this country. I'll give you a bravo Zulu for your performance today, and that's a wrap.
Thank you for listening to Mission Oriented. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and you won't miss an episode. To learn more about Mission Oriented and the Veteran Crowd Network, visit us at www.veterancrowdnetwork.com.